The weirdest part about this, though, is that you're from Florida. Like, this is your... This
All right,
and
listen.
oranges is your export to America. Disney, oranges, and stupid news stories about idiots getting eaten by alligators. Like, this is it. This is what you got. And
nope. I may be from Florida, but I am so not Florida. Like, and you mentioned oranges. I am highly allergic to citrus. So that is the other part of this. I really am not fitting into the Florida brand at all. Can't even be near an orange.
3 women talking about politics?
If democracy had a group chat, this would be it. Welcome to Organizing Chaos with Roots to Results, where we unpack the chaos that is politics and give you the tools you need to do something about it. I'm Meg Simons, Creative Director with Roots to Results, and I'm here with Roots to Results co-founders, organizers, and all-around political badasses, Laura Miranda Brown.
Hey.
And Sarah Virgo.
Hi.
What's this? What's this? There's magic in the air, and it's not Christmas. It's primary season. That's right. We are here to talk about a thing that everyone who pays attention to politics is always screaming about, and everyone else has no idea even happens. Primaries.
Yay!
Now here's the thing. Yay!
Insert crowd noise.
Mm-hmm. I knew that reference too, Meg. That's one I did know.
Oh, my God.
It's a Halloween adjacent thing, so I got it.
Perfect. All right, now here's the thing. We are all hearing about elections literally all the time. But the thing is, most people are talking about presidential elections. But there are elections happening every single year. And they actually have a lot more to do with your daily life than the presidential elections. Even though this current presidential administration does make it feel like he's just like in our house screaming at us every single moment of every single day. But in a normal administration, primary elections, what are they? Do we need them? And why won't your political friends shut up about them? Sarah, as my political friend, will you tell me, give me the world's briefest primer on primaries?
Yeah, sure. So as your political friend, I will also never shut up about primaries because I think that they are equally important to the regular elections. And there's almost always, depending on where you are in the country, there's almost always a primary happening. So they are very, very important. And they essentially allow the party to decide the candidate that will appear on the general election ballot. So presidential primaries are actually a relatively recent development in American politics. Obviously, when the Constitution was written, they weren't writing anything for a formal system to choose these political nominees. Early candidates were actually selected through congressional caucuses, but they were really largely controlled by like party bosses. And then primaries really began in the early 1900s during the like progressive era. I'm quoting there. As a way to give voters like more influence and more of a say in the democratic process, but still really had very limited power because of those political bosses. So if you think of like machine politics, that really heavily controlled primaries for a very, very long time. But by this...
Hold on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you give an example of what like machine politics are?
Like if you're thinking of maybe like Gangs of New York, where everyone is like forced to go vote, but they better vote for a particular person. And I'm not implying that that's how it was happening all the time, but that idea that you have to kind of get through these political bosses to appear on the ballot in a specific way, kind of true for a very long time. Really evident in the 1968 convention, the Democratic Convention, where candidates who had not even participated in the primary convention process were still appearing on the ballot. And there was a whole lot of call for change at that point. There were protests outside of the convention. It's a fascinating convention if you wanted to learn more about it. But by the 70s and 80s, primaries really became the way that candidates competed for nominations.
Just to reiterate this, the primary process is not one that is determined or guided by the government itself. This is independent of government. These are political parties who've come up with their own rules, their own processes, and then they get to choose who's going to be on the ballot, and that's who we're stuck with. Did I get that right?
Yes and no. Yes, for conventions. If you're looking at like a local election where you're deciding, for city council or assembly person, those kinds of things, there are state and county regulations that kind of determine, do you need a petition? How many signatures do you need? What's the process to appear on the ballot? But you could theoretically have 50 people, 50 Democrats all vying for one spot as the Democratic nominee on a ballot in the primary. That's why when you get to the general election, you see one or two candidates, usually Democrat, Republican, maybe you have additional parties, but they've all gone through the primary process. That's why if you are not voting in the primary, you don't have a say, you really won't have a say in who's on that general election ballot. So primaries are incredibly important. That's when you really get to say who is your nominee.
I think it's important to remember that our system was set up for a landed gentry to maintain power. And over time, that has gotten edited and revised to allow for more direct participation. I think, to Sarah's point, we've done a much better job of getting direct participatory primaries at a local and state level. It's the presidential that remains such an uphill battle to get rid of the super delegates, the extra delegates, all of that exists. And honestly, I'm not well versed enough on the Republican side to know whether they have super delegates, but on the Democratic side, that has been a bone of contention within the party for a long time. I think the primary process in America is very complex, but I also think it's sort of like, I think it's a reflection on us as a country. We have 50 states, and each state does things differently, and that's kind of the special sauce.
Yeah, I think when we say, you've heard us say before, like primary the shit out of everyone, and it really is because the structure that's in place now is not a perfect structure by any means. There are lots of flaws with it. But I think it really does level the playing field a little bit, not maybe financially or with power structures, but it does allow for, if you are part of this party and you want to be considered for the general election, this is the process to do it. Where in history, it has not always been that simple or that straightforward for people.
So can I get up on my soapbox for like a hot second here?
Go for it.
I can't let this go. The most important thing Americans can do right now is register for a party affiliation. And I know that feels shitty. And I know people want to say that they aren't, they can't be defined by a political label, and they don't believe in every single thing that party stands for, and they don't want to be pigeonholed, and they're an independent. And there's this like American desire to always consider oneself independent and above, and that you can be swayed and persuaded. And that's wonderful. But you have disenfranchised yourself, because most of the United States is a closed party system. So if you would like an opportunity to vote for a Democrat, because you tend to fall along those lines anyway, you gotta register as a Democrat. There is strategy involved in this. There is opportunity involved in this. And I really think people need to get over themselves and stop saying, I'm an independent. Great. But now you're a non-voter, and now you have no say in who's going to end up on your ballot in November. So if you're tired of seeing like the shittiest options, you got to get involved. You got to register. If you are old enough to register to vote, then you are also old enough to understand harm reduction and the strategic importance of participating in every election you can possibly participate in. I will now step down off my soapbox.
Can I borrow that soapbox?
Yeah, jump up.
Perfect. Because I want to talk about something called the Overton window. The Overton window is basically kind of like the window of what people, the public, finds acceptable, right? And so when you hear people talking about shifting the Overton window, it's about like changing what feels normal and acceptable to the public. So most recently, you'll probably hear about, how Trump's buffoonery and shenanigans and just all around evil doing are shifting the Overton window of what the American public thinks a president should be able to do. But I want to talk about it in terms of primaries, right? Because I think when you're looking at the Democratic Party, there's a lot of discussion about this kind of feeling of a split in the Democratic Party. There are kind of your old guard Republicans, I would say like a Chris Coons or a Chuck Schumer, that kind of...
I think you mean
can you
old-style Democrat. Because you just called them an old-style Republican. Which is quite the Freudian...
So let's talk about something called the Freudian slip. So... let's roll that back. So you've got kind of your old guard Democrats, right? Like your Chuck Schumers, your Nancy Pelosi's, your kind of establishment, especially in the internet sphere. We talk about them a lot as like the establishment Democrats.
Yeah.
And then you've got your kind of like next wave of political leadership, your Zoran Mamdani's, your AOC's, your Ayanna Pressley's, your Cori Bush's, right? And it feels like a big split between them. And then people are like, well, we have all these amazing young leaders. How do we keep ending up with old establishment white men being the only ones running and being the only ones we have the option to vote for on election day? And the answer is primaries. Because if you're not voting in the primary, you're letting that establishment, old guard, but you're letting them pull the Overton window to the right. If you go vote in a primary, you have the opportunity, that is your strongest opportunity to make your voice heard and to actually get to have a say in who the candidate will be.
I was always told you vote with your heart in a primary and you vote with your head in a general.
Yeah. If you want to see more like progressive, young, next wave leaders, start voting in primaries. Because you know who's voting in primaries? Your grandma.
Yeah, boomers are for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think the other thing to keep in mind too with party affiliation is that you can always change that party affiliation. Like I know a lot of people who switch every year just because of the primaries. They feel passionate about certain issues and specific candidates and they want to be able to vote for them in primaries. So they change as soon as the election is over, which is perfectly fine. You also have some states where you can actually declare on election day. It isn't true in every state for sure, but in your particular state, wherever you're living, there's a chance that you could declare your party affiliation on primary day, which is a really neat opportunity to say, this is what the party I am for today or, the next couple of days. The other thing too, there's a big wave of Democratic Socialists who are looking to kind of be the progressive movement within the Democratic Party. You still have to be a Democrat to vote for Democratic Socialist in almost every state. There are some small instances where, because there are lots of Democratic Socialists running, they will primary on their own and that is afforded a separate party affiliation. But for the most part, if you're a Democratic Socialist, you've got to register as a Democrat to participate in a vote for them. So I think picking an affiliation, whether it's temporary or permanent, is always the right way to go and the best way to go from a strategy perspective. But I think not showing up for a primary is a huge mistake because we hear people all the time complaining that, well, it's just these two. Why aren't there better choices? Why isn't this person running? They did run most of the time. They ran in the primary and primary turnout is terrible. Terrible.
Yeah, I think, when we first started talking about what this episode would look like, we'll give the listener some insight into our process. We always ask, what is the point of this episode? What are we going to leave our audience with? And I think the most critical thing we can leave everyone with is remind your friends and neighbors and relatives and literally anyone you run into that the deadline to register for a primary in your state is probably fast approaching. It is, you know, by mid March in most states it's closing. If you've got a June primary, which is most states have a June primary, and Michigan has an August primary, and you know, every state has their own rules. So again, caveat, check your own state. But tell everyone, remind everyone, check your voter registration status. Make sure you can vote in the primary. And then look these people up. It's a lot harder in the like really local races to find people because most people won't have websites, but they'll have a Facebook page. They'll have an Instagram page. Find them. They're probably walking around trying to find voters to talk to. If you make yourself available, you would be shocked at how quickly candidates flock to you because they're desperate to get in front of any voter they can possibly get in front of. And expanding the primary base is the fastest way to gain control. And I use that like in the loosest possible way. Better said, it's the fastest way to gain influence over the November election. Right? If you come really close, if your candidate comes really, really close to winning that primary, it's going to force the general election candidate to not go so far out into the center lane because they almost lost their primary by being too moderate. They can't afford to lose the people who voted for their opponent. There is a lot of really good organizing that can happen on the ground in a primary.
Yeah. And I know we always try and leave people with like one thing they can do. And I want to really zero in on something that is happening right now that I want people to know about. And this is not in the script, so I'm going off book here. But I want to talk about the SAVE Act because it is like quickly coming up for a vote. And it could literally change whether you are registered to vote between the primary and the general election. So the SAVE Act is a terrible bill with a innocuous name.
Great
the
branding.
SAVE Act, yeah, great branding, unfortunately. The SAVE Act does basically a lot of shit to make it harder to vote. It would make it so that you have to bring extra forms of ID. People might have to have passports to vote. Women who have gotten married and maybe their birth certificate doesn't match their current name, which a lot of women take their husband's last name when they get married. That's just a thing we do in our culture. They might not be able to vote if they can't provide all of the proper documentation. It also allows states to do things like voter roll purges, which we've already seen have a big impact on whether people can vote because most states don't have same-day registration. So if you vote in the primary and then the SAVE Act passes and you get purged from a voter roll, if you don't find out soon enough, you might not be able to vote in the general. So what I want people to do right now is
That's a really good call out,
look
Meg.
up...
Yeah.
Thank you. What I want people to do right now is look up the SAVE Act, get information on it. Every progressive group out there has an explainer on what the SAVE Act is. And then use literally any of their tools to call your members of Congress and tell them to vote no.
Specifically your senators, because it has passed the House.
Call your senators and tell them to vote no. Because we should be making it easier for people to vote, not harder.
If any of this frustrates you, or if you are listening to this and being like, this is wild, why do so few people hold so much power in this country? Why does this process allow to take place? Who the fuck suggested the SAVE Act? Then you should run for office and you should start with a primary because lots of primaries, some of the most popular Democrats from John F. Kennedy, Jimmy Carter, Barack Obama, AOC, they won in really tight primaries, but they have gone on to do incredible things. I think the best place to start when you are thinking about some of this frustration and like figuring out a way to act, run for office. You should absolutely run for office and you should fix some of this bananas legislation that's coming through, and you should be the person that says, we shouldn't be deciding who the nominees are based on a few people saying that this is the best direction to go. Throw your hat in there. Reach out to us for help. That is a great way to get involved and to make a difference.
So we're going to leave you with action items.
Remind your friends to register for your primary if they are not already registered. That's the point of the episode, right? Primaries.
Yeah. Set a calendar invite for your reminder for yourself. Primaries are not advertised the same way that general elections are. You won't always get the day off. It's tougher to remember those dates sometimes, but remind yourself, remind others, bring a friend, vote early, do whatever you need to do, but vote in the primary.
Register to vote and vote in the primary. Primary the shit out of everyone. Tell your senator to vote no on the SAVE Act. 3 things.
Yeah.
You can do it. All right, folks. On that note, we've reached our 20 minutes. Don't forget to check out our social media feeds to keep the conversation going. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok and everywhere else at Organizing Chaos Pod. That's it for this episode of Organizing Chaos. Go outside, touch grass, register your friends to vote, and remember, the group chat is only part of the movement. We'll see you next time. Bye!